The reason why treaties work for something like landmines or chemical weapons is they're very discrete technologies. But AI is a general purpose technology. It's more like the combustion engine or the airplane. Nobody talked about a combustion engine arms race. AI is going to be ubiquitous on the battlefield in every technology.
This is Open to Debate. I'm John Donvan. Welcome to another of our episodes in partnership with the Council on Foreign Relations, where, again, we are drawn to the tension that surrounds AI, artificial intelligence, a technology that is moving fast to the point where algorithms can make critical decisions faster than our brains can, and arguably better. Take self-driving cars. We get that the goal is to put algorithms in charge of the road, and we're still figuring out, is that mostly good or is that mostly bad? But we are here to debate situations with much higher stakes, namely, what happens when algorithms go to war? Because it is now looking more than feasible that weapon systems, fleets of drones or gliders flying faster than sound, will ultimately incorporate AI of such power and autonomy that once launched, they will be out there attacking on their own. They can't be stopped. There is, to put it bluntly, no kill switch. And how should America's military strategic thinkers think about that question of delegating life or death decisions to machines, especially when you consider how quickly adversaries like China are making advances in AI? For this debate, here is our framing question. Wartime kill switch, human or AI? We have four superbly qualified debaters who will be arguing 2 against 2. One team arguing that it is essential to keep humans in the loop, the other with a higher confidence in the AI and willing to put AI at the helm. So we're going to get to our opening statements, and I'll say more about each debater as they come up to make their opening statements. Again, our question is wartime kill switch, human or AI? And first up, here to convince us that we should keep humans in the loop, I want to welcome Laura Walker McDonald. Laura is joining us from the International Committee for the Red Cross, commonly referred to as the ICRC. There she is a senior advisor for new technologies and conflict. She herself is a technologist and has spent her career focused on the convergence of technology and human rights, as well as AI governance, which is what she continues doing at the ICRC. Laura, we are delighted to have you with us, and you can take the floor there. You are arguing for keeping humans in the loop. You are answering human to the question. Please tell us why.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to me and to the ICRC. And I'm going to start with the good news. So the good news is, because we're talking about armed conflict in the debate question, this is not the Wild West. This is not one of those lawless AI spaces. There are rules, because states a long time ago got together and decided that we needed a set of binding rules to set limits on warfare, to save lives and to preserve human dignity in war. So that body of law, IHL, or International Humanitarian Law, says that states therefore have to, when they're choosing and using weapon systems, make sure that those systems comply with IHL. And it says that there must always be meaningful human control and judgment at the helm in the use of force. What does that mean? So imagine that I have a slingshot, and I might arm it with a little rock here, and I might pull it back, and I might choose a target, and I could choose to put a little more mustard on it. I could ease up a little bit. I could change my target. I could put the thing back in my pocket and choose a different course of action entirely. And I can do that because I have human control of my slingshot. And that's probably good, because IHL, International Humanitarian Law, says that I need to be able to distinguish between military targets and civilians, humanitarians, medical facilities, and other protected persons and objects. And it says that I have to take all necessary or all feasible precautions to try and avoid and mitigate harm to those people and objects. And it says that I should make sure that any harm that I do cause through my use of force is not totally out of proportion with the military gain that I'm getting through that use of force. So imagine then that my slingshot, I could just leave it floating here in the air on its own, primed, ready to go, and I could just go to the pub and leave it here, and at some later time it would be triggered by the environment. Or I could give it a mission. I could say, go out into Midtown and get something, like a pigeon. We're in New York, it shouldn't be hard, right? So then my slingshot is zooming around Midtown looking for a pigeon, but I'm not there. So how do I then make those distinctions? How do I assess the environment? How do I make sure that nothing's changed, that someone's not moved seats, that a totally different group of people didn't come in? I would never ask a slingshot to do that. I wouldn't ask it to distinguish between a civilian and a combatant, or a pigeon and a person, come to think of it. But we are starting to ask AI to do that. And we can talk tonight about whether that's a good idea, about whether AI has been known to struggle to identify human emotion, like intent, like whether AI has shown bias or shown difficulty coping with a complex, contested urban environment like we often see in conflict, where civilians and combatants are often in the same spaces, using the same infrastructure like bridges, often looking quite the same. The law does need to develop sometimes, and the ICRC is recommending, and states are moving this way with some urgency, which is good, to come up with new binding rules on AI autonomous weapon systems that behave unpredictably, that we don't really know how they're going to cope with a given situation, or specifically AI or autonomous weapon systems that are used to target humans. And there is some stuff in there also about a self-destruct capacity that could be a kill switch. But here's the thing. We're not talking about slingshots. We're talking about weapons with destructive capacity that can really harm real human lives. If we are ceding life and death decisions to software and sensors, we are removing the empathy, the restraint, the moral responsibility, and the respect for humanity that can come only from us, from humans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. Standing up next to give his opening remarks, taking the position that we can count on AI to get the job done, I want to welcome Michael Horowitz. Michael is a senior fellow for technology and innovation here at the Council on Foreign Relations. But that's not all. He's also formerly served in the Department of Defense and currently teaches at the University of Pennsylvania, where he is also the director of their Center for Global Policy, the Perry World School. Michael, please take the floor, and it's your turn to tell us your position.
Thanks so much. That was a great description of the way war worked in the past. Let me tell you about the way war works now and will work in the future. We shouldn't let the fever dreams of 1980s movies like The Terminator stop us from integrating technology that can actually improve the ability of militaries, not just to win wars, but to actually follow international humanitarian law more effectively. We can have the best of both worlds, essentially, with the humans and the machines working together. But we can't do that with a kill switch. And the best example of that comes from today's war in Ukraine, where Ukrainian units every day have fire rained on them by Russian aggressors. And they defend themselves in large part with drones. And those drones that they defend themselves with, well, Russia jams them. They use what's called electronic warfare to take those drones out of the sky using the data link between the person who's monitoring the slingshot and the weapon to ensure that Russian forces stay safe and Ukrainian forces die. If there's no data link, there's nothing to jam. And that's what Ukraine has learned over the last 2 years, and one of the reasons that they've become so effective at fighting on the battlefield. Eliminating that kill switch is essential to enabling the responsible use of artificial intelligence on the battlefield with systems that are proven to work. We've entered the era of precise mass in war, where every country around the world can use AI and autonomy, precision guidance, and commercial manufacturing, everybody from the Houthis to the Ukrainians to countries like the United States and China. In the real scenarios where we should be paying attention to the use of force in this context, and the real scenarios where we care most about AI are not the use of AI to track somebody down in midtime. That's the last place that military testing and evaluation would ever show you could even trust a system to work on the battlefield. But you know where we might be likely to trust them soon? In naval combat, in air combat, in big wars between states. And the most important things are following international humanitarian law and then winning conflicts if they happen. And what AI-enabled weapons allow you to do And what AI-enabled weapons would allow a military like the United States to do is deter aggression by countries like China in the Indo-Pacific and prevail if a conflict like that actually occurs. Because the drone swarms that people dreamed about and wrote stories about are not just something that might happen in the future. They're something that could happen now. And failing to take advantage of them when you know that your adversaries will is begging for trouble. And how do I know this? I know this because my office wrote the Department of Defense's policy on autonomy and weapon systems, which argues that there should always be a human responsible for the use of force. There should always be appropriate human judgment over the use of force. But just like you can't control a bullet after you fire it, and you can't control a radar-guided missile after you fire it, at some point, you do the testing and evaluation that proves systems work. And if we can do that, and we can demonstrate that AI-enabled systems are superior to non-AI-enabled systems, we will not just be reducing damage, because AI systems don't get mad, don't get scared, and don't get angry. We'll be increasing our effectiveness on the battlefield. Thank you.
Our next speaker is going to be Elliot Ackerman. Elliot is the former Marine Corps officer and CIA Special Activities officer. He served 5 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, highly decorated for his service, including the Purple Heart. Since then, he has pivoted to become a decorated writer, writing multiple New York Times bestsellers, including Waiting for Eden and co-authoring 2034. Elliot, you have 4 minutes, please, to make your case.
Thanks so much.
Elliot, do you mind doing that
Sure.
from your feet? Thanks.
I think what we've heard a little bit about here is that AI is necessarily going to be ushering in an entirely new era in warfare. And I am somewhat skeptical about that. I think when we look at warfare, what we can see is that it has an enduring characteristic, that is the contest fundamentally between 2 human wills. And any time as a country we lose sight of the fact that war is primarily a human act, it becomes less likely for us to be able to successfully prosecute a war. So if we go all the way back through what's going to their history, what's going on right now with the development of artificial intelligence isn't necessarily a completely new paradigm. We can look in the 20th century, the development of poisonous weapons, chemical weapons. We can look to the latter half of the 20th century, and the development of nuclear weapons and the need to establish deterrent regimes for their use, to look at examples today of how we as a country, and frankly how the international community, should be looking at how it deals with the advent of AI. And I don't think either of us are going to necessarily be arguing too strenuously that the United States shouldn't be developing these technologies, leaning into them, seeing how they can make our militaries more lethal, or necessarily ceding that technological ground to our adversary countries. What we're making an argument for is that the United States should, and in some ways already is, leading in the frameworks that exist as to how this technology is regulated on the battlefield. And that will not only allow the United States to lead in future wars, but it will also allow us to retain the moral high ground and the political high ground that is essential for the successful prosecution of any war, particularly the type of peer-level engagements that we could imagine seeing this technology used in. So, this isn't a debate that you're going to see, as much as it might be framed, between some Luddites over here and some people who believe in technology over here. This is going to be a debate more centrally framed as how should that technology be responsibly developed, morally, but also to give us the greatest political advantage in a conflict going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Elliot. And finally, taking the position with more confidence in AI, I want to welcome Lieutenant General Jack Shanahan. Jack is another alum of the Defense Department. He was the inaugural director of the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, which worked on bringing AI into the U.S. defense operations. These days, he's a senior fellow at the Center for New American Security. Jack, thanks so much for joining us tonight. The floor is yours. Please tell us why you're taking your side in this debate.
Thanks, John. The history of war is also a history of technology. From sling and stone to sword and shield to nuclear weapons to now tens of thousands, soon to be millions of small tactical drones in the battle space. The pattern throughout history has been the same. States and non-state actors will constantly seek to develop new technologies or adapt existing technologies to deter potential adversaries, and when deterrence fails, to fight and win in conflict. AI is no different. Militaries will adopt AI with the expectation that it will improve operational performance and that it will allow them to gain and maintain the upper hand. AI-enhanced weapon systems, up to and including lethal autonomous weapon systems, are inevitable. Indeed, the AI horse bolted from the barn a long time ago. Humans have always decided how, when, and where these tools are used. That's why tonight's proposition, the concept of a so-called human kill switch, is very comforting, but it's misguided. It implies that there is a sole human-activated button that'll save us all from the risks of intelligent machines. The real issue is not whether such a switch exists. The real issue is how we design, field, and govern these systems so that humans remain responsible and accountable for the use. We must not fall prey to the fallacy that in this future, humans can no longer control AI weapons. It's too easy to paint a stark binary picture about this future, either one in which humans and only humans decide and act in wartime, or alternatively, one in which roving gangs of sentient killer robots roam indiscriminately around the battlefield, making life and death decisions on their own. Yes, it's true. In the future, the role of humans will shift further left, especially as we go further and further towards AI-enhanced autonomous weapon systems. Yet, contrary to the striding claims of AI's vocal critics, human agency does not and will not disappear. The key to success in this future is not only in defining the role of human control in the AI battle space, but in determining where, how, and when that control should be applied. To assume that that's an impossible task does a grave disservice to military men and women who have shown throughout history that they're perfectly capable of adapting to new technologies. Now, I don't intend to place AI on a pedestal that it doesn't belong. But I also don't want to pretend that it's realistic that we're going to ban lethal autonomous weapon systems. I do, however, assert that we should welcome and encourage the development of capabilities that will augment and improve human decision-making. AI is one of these capabilities. As a former fighter aviator, intelligence professional, commander at every level, I know all too well the kind of mistakes that humans will make in war. So yes, we should have some concerns about the risks of automation bias, of humans placing unjustified confidence in machines. But I tell you what, we should be even more concerned about the risk of human biases demonstrated throughout history, especially under the extraordinary stress of combat. We have a responsibility to give our military men and women the best possible tools to fight and win, but also to help reduce the risk of tragic mistakes in combat. By the way, tragic mistakes that Elliot has written so eloquently and powerfully about in his works. International humanitarian law itself suggests we have a moral obligation to develop these kinds of weapons. We should not pretend by any stretch of the imagination that only humans with our well-documented flaws and cognitive limitations should be entrusted to make every single critical decision in the battle space of the future. Instead, we should be focusing on how humans and smart machines can be integrated in ways that we get the best decision-making out of humans and machines. And finally, we shouldn't imagine for a minute that a human kill switch will solve all our problems and solve war's dilemmas. Human judgment, foresight, accountability, and ethics by design principles can and should be built into these systems from the very beginning. The future of war will not be written by machines alone or by kill switches. It'll be written by the choices humans make about how we use them. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody. Now we move on to round two, and in round two we have a discussion with one another, talking about the themes that have been laid out in the opening statements. I have a lot of notes from what I heard, and part of the reason for that is that both of you come to this debate with rather nuanced positions on our question. As you say, the side that's arguing for the humans being in the loop, and that's terminology that we're coming up with, that you're not Luddites, that you're not arguing or expecting in any way that development of AI is going to stop, and you don't even recommend it, but you have a concern that there's a situation moving forward without a simultaneous emphasis on developing guidelines, trying to bring about, as you said, happened with chemical weapons and nuclear weapons, some sort of international standards for what would be lawful. But you also made the case that one of your concerns is that the kind of situation in which the AI would be needing to make decisions would involve potential attacks, mistaken attacks on targets like civilians or humanitarian groups. But fundamentally, your argument seems to be based on a concern that this thing might run away without enough forethought. From the other side, I'm hearing an argument that you fundamentally think it would be the moral case is actually to develop these weapons, and you make a strong case that you think that these weapons, because of their ability to think quickly, I'm using think in quotation marks, but to think quickly and make decisions that might be better than people could make in a stressful situation, that they present a kind of moral advantage. You also make the case that not to develop these weapons would be a moral failing because America's adversaries would be doing just that and would put us at a disadvantage. And finally, you made the remark in your closing that these would reduce the risk of tragic mistakes, and therefore progress in this area is actually a moral imperative. I want to take that to your opponents, and I'll start with you, Laura. The argument being made that these things actually can be better than people at figuring out what's right, what's wrong, and that they can be programmed to do that and perform that way. What's your response to that?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think you're right to call out that there's a degree of nuance that we'll probably get into in this conversation. And I'm a technologist, as you said, that in addition to being a made-up career, I'll be honest, means that I got into this game to try to use technology to help, to make things better. And one of the things I've learned in trying to do that is that, to paraphrase a military turn of phrase, that no software or system survives first contact with the user or with reality. And so I really believe in the need to try and start slow, to test, and to learn from what's happening. And that requires time. It requires a real learning mindset and an evidence base and a sandbox. And we are building some of those things, which is really encouraging. But I think there's also a sort of pace. There's an urgency that you can hear in our opponents over there that we need to get this done now. I think in terms of can it help us do things better? I think there are some things where AI has been shown to do a really good job. Large data sets would take a human a long time to comb through, less so when they're dealing with these complex environments that I talked about, like something that's changed a lot recently, or something that is an environment that's very different to the one that was in the training data. So it's not something that the AI has seen before, and conflict is all about that. It's all about change.
Can I break in to let you?
Yes, please.
I'd just like to respond to the point that your opponent made just near the end there, that situations can very practically, theoretically, also just baffle the AI when it's an extremely complex situation.
They baffle humans now. I mean, think about the way a radar-guided missile works, where a pilot like Jack might fire a radar-guided missile, and it turns a seeker on, and it starts to hone in on the target, and it doesn't know that the radar is on top of a school or on top of a hospital, and then hits an illegal target. Wouldn't it be great if there was even a kind of dumb algorithm on that might say, oh, that radar's on top of a school, maybe we shouldn't hit it? That's actually not that cluttered or complicated a situation, and one in which there are a lot of advantages.
And if I can add, John, just because as much as Michael and I, you heard a sense of urgency, Laura's right on that, it's a sense of urgency, but What we'll always come back to is the urgency and the imperative of test and evaluation. That's where you won't discover everything in test and evaluation, but I can speak from very personal experience running both Project Maven and the Joint AI Center in the Defense Department. You find an awful lot of problems that way, and you continue to find problems when these things are fielded, so you're constantly trying to improve them. It's not an overnight process. This plays out over time, and that's the difference. Test and evaluation, responsible AI.
Your opponents made the point that bullets are fired and can't be recalled, and same with cannonballs and artillery shells and bombs dropped from airplanes in World War II. How is that different from a future where AI is on the battlefield?
Well, I think something we're doing a little bit here is we're conflating different forms of AI. And so I think the idea of using artificial intelligence to help a human target or to help a human weapons system, take defensive measures or not launch a missile. I would not argue against that. Absolutely, help the human being.
So where is the conflict?
I think the conflict is when we start talking about, for instance, swarming technology. That you send a drone swarm out across the battlefield.
How many drones constitutes a drone swarm? Just for the audience that's not professional.
Say, a dozen could constitute it, or higher. I mean, depending on how the technology evolves. And that you give, one of the things you learn, I learned early on as a Marine, this idea of commander's intent. That one of the things that's made the U.S. military very strong for years is this idea that we don't tell our troops exactly what to do, we give them an intention. And they achieve the mission. Now, one of the things that's being argued is that AI in the future becomes a technology where you can give them that commander's intent, but the battlefield is constantly changing. So I think where we're talking about this complexity is not sort of, yes, let's help human targeters hit the right target. It's these sort of offensive AI capabilities where we're writing algorithms for them that give a commander's intent, and the questions around how efficacious are those algorithms once you send swarms over the horizon.
That was very helpful for the sake of this debate. So I'd like to, if you're willing to play along with this, to narrow down to that sort of weapon.
Yeah. So let me offer one.
Actually, I just want to see if your opponent hasn't had a word in a couple of minutes. If you would like to say something.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think the challenge here is that in that kind of situation, the question is, what are your alternatives? The issue is if you don't have that drone swarm in the future, if you don't have the ability to have AI engaged in decision support, and your opponents do, you'll be at a huge disadvantage on the battlefield. And so if you can test these systems and prove that they work, why wouldn't you use every tool you have to try to help your military win and to reduce humanitarian damage?
Yeah. I would just add, I wouldn't argue against that. I think that we as a country, if I were writing defense policy right now, I would absolutely say we need to develop this technology, that it's moving very, very quickly, that we can't cede that technology to our adversary, but that technology enters a sort of special category of technology, which is highly regulated weapon systems, where we are concurrently having bilateral or multilateral conversations with our adversaries saying, we all know that we're gearing up for this, but we can all agree none of us want this to happen. And there's plenty of precedent for that. Treaties we've signed around landmines, treaties we've signed around chemical weapons, and treaties we've signed around nuclear weapons. And if you get into this argument that, well, this must be done because at the end of the day, it is just the most efficacious system and it must be on the battlefield, I will give you a weapon system that's going to beat AI every single time.
Laura, do you want to add to that?
And that's a thermonuclear weapon.
Yeah, so on nuclear weapons, we have gotten together and said that we don't think AI should be involved in making command decisions around nuclear weapons. And the reason for that is that there's a risk of a non-zero risk of error, and the consequences are extreme. But the thing is that problem scales. I mean, that problem scales down. So there is always a risk of error with these systems. So the question is, what is an acceptable risk? The position that we're putting forward is that there should be some rules. It's a nuanced position. It's not an all or nothing thing. We're saying we should try to avoid using these systems in places where they might behave unpredictably, so where they don't perform well. So we need to know what that is. To your point about, wouldn't it be great to have a data set that would tell us where the schools are? In conflict, schools move, humans move very quickly, and they move constantly, and it's very dynamic, and it's not clear where the data...
know that better than the AI?
It's not clear that there is a data set for some of these conflicts where that is currently correct. But what you wouldn't know as a human operator is whether that data set is correct. So if you rely on it, that might actually be entering new risk.
Jack.
I'll just, so Elliot and Laura said something that's really important that I want to get at. And what Elliot said is, look, we're talking about different use cases here. So what I've always talked about is the importance and the utility of having a risk management framework. These are not all the same systems. So you, on one end, you, as Laura was just alluding to here, you have AI and nuclear command and control. Not good, right? Down to the unacceptable category. And then all the way to, say, personnel decision support system, no problem. Somewhere in between, there are a lot of gradations here. And so a risk management framework, any commander should always be looking at this in terms of what are the risks to the mission, what are the risks to the force. And anytime I can do a risk analysis and mission analysis, I'm always looking about what controls can I put in place, what I'd call mitigation measures, hardware, software, policy, and procedural. So yes, one size does not fit all, but that's why a risk management framework would help all of us make the right decisions about what tools get used where.
Some of you have been in combat, and I have a question that that relates to the role of emotion in the conversation we're having. I can imagine that emotion could lead to stress and to bad decisions. I could imagine that emotion leads to empathy and humanity and making the right decision. But where can one of you jump in and talk about the, especially since you've been, as I said, decorated, talk about the role of stress and emotion and whether the AI would be better at that?
Sure. I mean, I think probably Jack can speak a great deal about targeting, because I think that's actually a very important area and worthy of discussion of how the combination of a human with the power of targeting AI could actually be a great thing and reduce the types of mistakes that occur on the battlefield. But the one thing my experience of combat taught me, which is ground combat, is that it's, it is fundamentally a very human at its most elemental level, a very human and very violent act. And it's, at least at that type of combat, it's difficult to divorce the AI. And we're seeing that we're to overcome that with technology. And we're seeing that in Ukraine, where you have a strange hybrid war that looks like, on the one hand, the most high-tech war we've ever seen, and on the other hand, the trenches of the First World War. And I think any war going forward, you will always have that sort of hybrid, high-tech, low-tech combination. And the low-tech is just that war is fundamentally about killing.
One real-world example from back in Desert Storm, since you mentioned you were covering Desert Storm. A crew of F-4G, a Wild Weasel, fired a anti-radiation missile right at a U.S. Patriot battery and killed some people. I'm absolutely convinced that an AI would not have allowed that to happen. So there are emotional things that we have to take into account, but I think there are also ways this technology can be extraordinarily helpful in augmenting humans. And that's the way I look at this. It's augment, accelerate, and automate, generally in that order.
I guess my question is, since AI doesn't experience stress, is that, Elliot, a good thing or a bad thing?
I mean, that's Mike, but that's
I'm sorry, Mike.
It's okay. But I think that's a good thing in general, as long as you've done the testing and evaluation correctly. And that's exactly why when we wrote the U.S. Defense Department policy on autonomy and weapon systems, because there's so much concern about these systems, that we added this elevated scrutiny and review for having fully autonomous weapon systems or lethal autonomous weapon systems or whatever you want to call them, ensuring that senior Defense Department leaders would look at them multiple extra times before they're deployed on the battlefield to ensure that they're safe and that they'll work well to protect soldiers, because that's what the goal is at the end of the day. And if you have an AI system that doesn't get tired, doesn't get stressed, doesn't get angry, and you've tested and validated it the way that US policy says, you're going to be much better off than an international treaty that bans these things.
I mean, you mentioned review, and I'm all for that. I'm a little worried about how we keep up. And particularly given that if you're talking about something like a drone, there's the hardware and then the software. And I don't know if any of you have ever used a smartphone, but it is possible to be quite sad about a software
I turned
update.
mine off for this. I mean, that's like a lot. I mean, you should ask my wife. That's like a lot for me.
We've all been through that today.
just take a brief pause for our... but no, I mean, it's the software updates could happen, every Tuesday. They could have more often than that. And we've all had the experience of doing something suddenly that you didn't know it was going to do. And nobody wants a warfighter to be in that position. And also, to go back to my opening remarks, that is also, the law is that you have to know, and a weapon must have predictable effects, or the word for it becomes indiscriminate, because you can't plan. You can't mitigate the harm to those protected groups. You can't know what the effects are likely to be. And if an AI, any kind of software, but also AI, becomes in that situation where you're not quite sure how it's going to respond, or it's just being updated, and then it's doing something unexpected that you weren't predicting, that becomes a very difficult thing for the warfighter to deal with.
In the opening statements, it was implied, one of the arguments, I don't think the name China was mentioned, but our adversaries and China is gangbusters on AI these days, unquestionably developing these weapon systems themselves. Concern from this side about that?
Well, as a citizen, sure, plenty of concern. And I think, as I said in my opening remarks, I'm not arguing against a ban on AI categorically, that the United States not, and I don't think we are arguing that the United States not develop these weapon systems, that we not be as far forward in the saddle as possible vis-a-vis our peer-level competitors. There's plenty of precedent for that. The United States, we have plenty of chemical weapons that we've developed, and we have stockpiles of them. We have stockpiles of nuclear weapons. These are all banned weapons. We still have them, and we are parties to conventions that ban them on the battlefield.
And they have a deterrence.
But they have a deterrent effect, right? The argument here is that those deterrent regimes, that those treaties, that those have to be aggressively developed in tandem with the technology, because to not do so, particularly as it deals with the types of AI that is lethal, target-seeking, not the type of AI we're talking, which is to help the warfighter. The types of AI that there's no human in the kill switch. You're sending these things over the horizon, and we can't call them back. I don't think that's something any of us would like to see on a battlefield, and we have a chance
But
right now.
aren't those existing weapons like an AMRAAM or a radar-guided missile? I mean, existing weapons humans fire over the horizon, and there's no kill switch and there's no monitoring of, and we've thought that those technologies were safe and effective for 40 years.
But there was meaningful human control. I mean, we're talking about a time gap
pilot
that's
sees
significant.
like a button and then sees a button, it's like, oh, I think an adversary's there, and you press go.
But you know what you're aiming at. I mean, that to me is the difference. I mean, when we're talking about things that are passive.
Pull that out. What do you mean? Why would we not know what we're aiming at?
Because if you send out a drone swarm, you have an intent of what you're aiming at, an algorithm. I'm looking for groups of soldiers. These algorithms we haven't, we haven't refined this yet.
Scan.
It scans and it looks and it becomes, as Laura said, indiscriminate. So I would say that is a weapon system that is more akin to a landmine. You bury it in the ground. If I bury 20 anti-tank mines in the ground, people can drive over those with motorcycles or walk over and they won't blow up. They'll only blow up if a tank rolls over it. But something could also, an 18-wheeler could roll over it. So I think these weapon systems wind up in a somewhat similar category, which should be regulated. Now, we have plenty of anti-tank mines in the United States, and we develop them and we have them, but we have agreements that they shouldn't be used. And when they are used, it's a disaster for countries. I mean, look in Ukraine. When that war finally ends, there's going to be just massive levels of mines that need to be cleaned up.
Jack.
Well, it really is all context and situation dependent. I would look at this very differently. We're talking about, say, a naval conflict in the South China Sea versus a battle for Fallujah or the equivalent in the next fight around the world. There are differences here, but we're seeing in Ukraine really interesting examples of technical hardware and software solutions to things like geofencing, a very fancy word for saying you can hit things in this general box, but you can't hit anything outside of that. I think these are solutions that can be resolved. There are policy questions, always policy questions that maybe are thorniest questions, but the hardware and software pieces of it, I think, are solvable.
What about your opponent's recommendation that there be conventions developed around these as we have around other weapons?
I am all in favor of continuing a dialogue at every possible level, because back to your China point, John, we don't want an escalatory spiral between two superpowers, each going as fast as they can on AI. I've always said, I've been consistent since I started this AI journey, it's in our national self-interest to accelerate AI adoption, but the fact that China's doing just as much imparts a new sense of urgency. So we should have international conversations on this. It's in everybody's national self-interest. It's a global self-interest.
But there's a difference between having conversations about it and something like a treaty. The reason why treaties work for something like landmines or chemical weapons is they're very discrete technologies. But AI is a general purpose technology. It's more like the combustion engine or the airplane. It's why when people talk about AI arms races, it's kind of incoherent. Nobody talked about a combustion engine arms race. AI is going to be ubiquitous on the battlefield in every technology. And so the notion that there could be some treaty that says don't do this just reflects a real 20th century mindset for how technology works on the battlefield.
I mean, one, can we talk about a combustion engine arms race? Because that sounds kind of fun. But two,
I actually have a paper I've been working on.
Okay. But it would be remiss of me not to stress that the ICRC is recommending that we have regulations specifically, or new rules specifically on autonomous weapon systems, not on AI, which, as you point out, is a very broad category. But I do think, I mean, you know, we've talked a lot about how do we identify those how do we find those use cases where the current technology we have right now and next will perform well, will perform predictably? How do we do the right kind of testing and review? How do we do the legal reviews on that and get them out the door in a way that is in line with existing law, which is what I have outlined so far today? I think that's the question.
And now we're going to take some questions from our esteemed audience here in New York. We have microphones circulating around, so please raise your hand. I'm going to call on you right then. And if you can stand up, and if you don't mind telling us at least your first name.
Hi, I'm Ginger Cutler. I have a question about how the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, would need to evolve in the age of AI warfare. I think my question probably starts with Lieutenant General Shanahan. I'm curious, if there were to be a mistaken strike, who is held accountable for that? Is it the last human operator? Is it the software engineer who wrote the code? Some combination thereof. And I'm especially curious, given that the bulk of development of AI weaponry is by the private sector. So I'm curious what needs to happen with the UCMJ to reflect these new weapons. And
Can I just say that question is fantastically constructed, and I want to thank you for that.
Thank you, sir.
That's how we'd like to see the rest of it.
It is a fantastic question. I have been thinking about this and talking about this and writing about this for about the past 8 years. And I'll cut to the chase. Humans are held responsible, accountable for actions during conflict. Software is not. Software engineers are not. There will be and there must be a process in place to hold people accountable. Now, we can get into questions about have we always done that the right way in all conflicts in American history. Sometimes we may have fallen short in holding people accountable, but there must be a process, which is why I say if we're going to have autonomous weapon systems out in some theater, a 4-star theater commander better know they're out there. That's now becoming a 4-star theater's understanding of a lethal autonomous weapon system, because that chain still exists. It's very personal to me. I knew I could be fired at the drop of a hat. The buck stops with somebody, so the buck has to stop. Now, doing the technical analysis of what happened and how it happened, it's a different one. But my instinct answer to you is the UCMJ shouldn't change. We should use it the way we've always used it, just search for the human responsibility.
Let's hear from the other side.
Impossible.
I agree with that. The only thing that I find challenging or wonder is, I think we've seen in the past, and there's been a lot of criticism of both Republican and Democratic administrations of there being a lack of accountability up and down the chain of command. So is it realistic to expect that if there is an incident with AI and it can be traced to bad software, that a 4-star commander is going to be fired over that, when we've seen much larger faux pas recently committed by senior flag ranked officers who do not get fired. So I think that's sort of an open question. And were I a sort of middle grade officer implementing some of this, I would be concerned that at the end of the day, I would actually be the one who was sort of the fall guy for the bad technology.
Thank you. Again, that was such a great question. Really appreciate it. Down in the front here. Mike's coming on your left side.
Hi, I'm Richard Horowitz. Just to I think Mike raised the specter of 1980s movies. I just want to mention the movie War Games, which kept me up at night as a child for a long time. I'm curious, anybody who's used ChatGPT knows that it hallucinates. And it's interesting to me that hasn't come up. So I'm curious, without a kill switch, how we can be comfortable that either the technology won't do something, hallucinate and do something terrifying and unexpected.
Which side are you directing the question
Well,
to?
both, because on the flip side of that, but really to the anti-kill switch side.
Yeah. We'll
the other
there.
question is, what about hacking?
I'm just going to take one. Well, actually, that's a good question. Hacking too. Yeah. I usually just take one question, not two-parters, but that was a sub-question. That was good.
This, to me, is all about the testing and evaluation process. Like, for example, hacking is already a risk for military systems. It's a huge risk and in fact, the biggest risk of hacking is through remotely piloted systems, because there's a data link between weapons and a human operator. If you cut that data link with an autonomous weapon system, there's actually nothing to hack. So you decrease the risk of hacking in that case. All of this, though, rides on whether you have a testing and evaluation system that works effectively to let you know that systems are reliable. And this is a case where incentives are aligned, actually, for militaries to address this issue, because nobody wants reliable systems more than militaries. Because, chat GPTs that would hallucinate on the battlefield aren't reliable, and unreliable systems aren't safe. And Jack or Elliot or others, nobody wants that on the battlefield, but that's why the testing and evaluation process is so detailed, to ensure that when these hit the battlefield, you know that they work.
Response from this side?
Yeah, I worry about the security of these systems as well. And in terms of hallucination, you do see the use of, say, a large language model in things like targeting systems, where it's like a workflow and it's helping you work through this process of figuring out what. And what makes me nervous about that is where you see on the back end, where you're starting to use LLMs to code the way that they manage data, which is then also processed by an AI. So you have the potential for a compounding error. And I think that is the predictability piece. Not only that, but some of these AI systems are black boxes. We don't really know how they work, and sometimes their creators don't know how they work. So that is, as Mike said, the role of testing and evaluation that I think is very important. But just quickly on this kill switch notion, what the ICRC is recommending is having a way to automatically cause for a human to cause the destruction of a unit if it is no longer fit for its purpose, if it's not able to carry out its purpose. And we do see the extensive use of drones in some contexts, and in some of those contexts you see a lot of fiber cable being used to avoid the jamming issue, but you also see a lot of drones drifting gently to the ground because they've run out of power or they've lost connection. And those are often armed with small amounts of munitions, and that is then just unexploded ordnance lying around. And that's indiscriminate. So there are these second order effects that I think we need to look at quite carefully and make sure we're managing responsibly, not just the US, but all states.
More questions? Right here.
Hi, my name is Hall. To the pro AI side, what do you tell a cadet or midshipman today about their future career? Are they going to live in a world where they're still leading as humans with maybe a human override option? Or will they be leading in a world where AI will constantly second guess them? AI will block them from making decisions at certain times.
Another perfectly constructed question. Thank you. That's really good.
Yeah, to me, this is a case of adaptation over time in military forces. We tend to think of these technologies as one day we wake up and we have these sentient killer robots. It's not going to happen that way. In my personal experience, going from sort of a steam-driven airplane to the very high-tech F-15E, we learned how to use those systems through education, training, academics, simulators, daytime flights, nighttime flights. It was a progression of steps where you got very familiar with the technology, and I don't think this will be any different. We'll learn to adapt over time. I'll tell you what, when we built this Project Maven for intelligence analysts to augment their work, we didn't have enough intel analysts. We weren't getting rid of them. We were trying to make them better at the job. So we're not talking about people going away wholesale. I really do think it's the order I said earlier. It's augment humans, accelerate the workload so they get more done, and then start talking about automation. Automation will happen, but I really don't see this as all of a sudden we wake up one day and we replace people with AI. It's going to be baked in ways that we'll just even stop talking about it as AI. It's a piece of kit, to use the Brit vernacular.
Elliot, do you want to take on the same question?
I would just add, I think that we've been talking a little bit as though the evolution of AI and the advent of these killer robots represents sort of a fixed endpoint in the evolution of technology on the battlefield, and that's never been the case. The history of war is a history of technology. From the first time Alexander the Great's army stepped on the battlefield with the phalanx to the trenches being dug in the First World War, where people thought maneuver was done forever. So these weapon systems will be developed, and then countermeasures will be made against these weapon systems, and we'll just continue this cycle as humans that we've been engaged in for millennia of technology, counter-technology.
Okay. Down in front. Mike's to your right.
My name is Joel Cohen. I'm at Rockefeller University down the street. Thank you for this. How do you avoid conflict of interest between the people who write AI software and the people who evaluate its effectiveness and safety? And how do you assure a supply of trained and well-educated people to write and evaluate critically the software?
What is the gist of the conflict that you're talking, conflict of interest?
Boeing designed an airplane and tested its safety inadequately because it was interested in making a profit. Most of the software, it will be written by the private sector and tested by the private sector. They have a financial stake in selling a product to the military. How do we control that?
I take your point. I just want to understand.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think to me, there's not a different question here for AI than for any other weapon system. The example you just gave of Boeing is one that has nothing to do with AI and weapon systems or autonomy in weapon systems. This is about living in a society with rules, and rules that separate like those that are building the systems from those that are doing test and evaluation, and that's critical for the testing and evaluation of all systems, not just AI systems.
Does the other side like to respond?
If I may. But I mean, thank you, sir, for an outstanding question. I mean, I do think, yes, but I agree. I do think that there is an issue in that, the private sector is able to attract a certain caliber of folks and hang on to them. And we know that the workforce on the government side can be slower to join and stay. And so there could be an imbalance that way. Another risk that I see, just because of the nature of this technology and the private sector companies that develop some of, not all, but some of the AI that goes into some of this stuff, is just that some of these companies did not come into being intending to be defense contractors, and now suddenly they are. And perhaps they don't come in with a knowledge of IHL, of international humanitarian law, that defense contractors would have, and they aren't necessarily aware of some new risks that might arise because they say now make drones that instead of being commercial drones, they are now dual use, let's say, or destined for a military purpose. And that means that it could be that their plants, their employees might be at risk of being directly targeted in certain circumstances. And, one of the things we're keen to do is make sure that private sector companies are aware of that when they're starting to enter these markets.
Right here. Thanks.
Amar Bhide, Columbia University. I started out being a profound skeptic of AI, but I will address my question to the
Did you start out as a profound skeptic tonight, or?
Oh, just for the last several years.
Okay.
But I will address my skepticism to the kill switch people. There's the famous line about Stalin asking at Yalta, how many battalions does the Pope have? And the same question might be asked, how many battalions does the ICRC or the International Court of Justice have? And history is written by the winners. War crimes are adjudicated also by the winners. Do you see any, just looking at what the kinds of, I think, horrendous violations of international law that have taken place in the last couple of years, do you think AI has anything to do with the accountability of the people, the possible accountability of the people who have been committing these war crimes?
Well, I'll try to answer that question. The point is well taken. I think, though, we're talking about, in some ways, the United States posture to the rise of AI and the ethical dilemmas that it poses. And if we look at the long arc of human history, I think you can say that might makes right is certainly a credo that has led to much conquest. But I think, at least at our best as a country in the United States, we try to adhere to just wars. And if you look back at our history of fighting wars, The ones where we have been the most successful have been the ones where there has been a strong moral imperative. And the moral imperative, at least in my view, is not necessarily a weakness. It actually strengthens our cause politically, because fundamentally war is a political action. And particularly for a democracy to go to war without any type of moral imperative, it becomes very difficult to sustain that war. So when we look at the adoption of AI and how it is being integrated throughout the US military, it's important that that moral imperative not be abandoned entirely simply because we are trying to get some type of lethal edge over our adversaries. I don't think that will actually serve the United States in the long run, because we are not Stalin's Soviet Union.
Yeah, I'll only add to sort of bolster the case, I guess, is what AI can do really well, as you know, I'm sure, is analyze voluminous amounts of data. So any war crimes that are out there, we're going to have an awful lot of data that doesn't disappear anymore. People are going to have a much harder time hiding these things than ever in the past. So again, I understand the right makes right, but at some point you could always go back and say, we already have the data, analyze the data, hold somebody accountable for it. Not exactly kill switch idea, but it's an important point.
Where I thought that question was going when you said might makes right is that your vision for the best outcome in the situation would depend on our adversaries also wanting to participate in some sort of control regime. You made a moral case for that, but wouldn't the case have to be self-interest on all sides as opposed to morality? And if there isn't morality, if you feel there's not morality coming from our adversary, where are we then?
Well, I mean, I think, again, if we're playing this out, you know, the argument, and I alluded to it before, that we have to in some ways abandon our morality in order to get a technological edge that will make us more lethal on the battlefield, because AI is sort of the sine qua non of lethality on the battlefield. It's actually false, because in the 20th century, as a species, we developed the most lethal weapon there is on a battlefield, which is a nuclear weapon. I mean, so at the end of the day, any of these countries, if they feel that they're entirely on the back foot, appear to the United States, could always use nuclear technology to obliterate. So we're already kind of outside of that rubric where you have to have this extra lethality to win a war. So immediately you're entering into a framework on a future battlefield with this AI where you're already holding something back. We're seeing this in Ukraine right now. In Ukraine, the Russians are holding something back. So we're going to be existing on a battlefield where there are constraints, and each side will be constrained in one way or another.
Make no mistake, though, about the importance of a democratic advantage by a country like the United States. And the person I learned that from was you in a Wall Street Journal op-ed you wrote in 2024, when you were talking about AI competition and said, whoever wins will possess a profound military advantage. Make no mistake, if placed in authoritarian hands, AI dominance will become a tool of conquest, which seems to me to be the best argument possible for a country like the United States leading in this technology rather than waiting to be taken advantage of by a country like Russia or China.
Yeah, I would say, well, big surprise, I agree with what I wrote.
I hope so.
With the caveat that I think the appropriate position for the United States is to be the nation that is not only the most far forward in the saddle in developing the technology, but is also the furthest forward in the saddle in leading with the types of international cooperation to ensure that we're not living in a world where U.S. troops are being killed by Chinese killer robots.
More questions? In the back there?
Thank you. Ken Kreitzer, CamVets Media. At a number of military Army conferences in particular I've been to this year, they talk about humans not being an initial point of contact with an adversary, using AI in some way to manage that point with an adversary and a point of conflict occurring. How do you manage AI in that situation? Could be land, could be in the air, could be on the water. How do you manage AI and the kill switch in that environment?
Very good point. And one of the things I think we ought to consider is how do these autonomous systems differ from very deliberate human signaling? Humans signal, policymakers signal, politicians signal for all sorts of reasons. We may be trying to signal, and the signal may be something a little bit different than what an individual leader might have expected. So we work our way through this. We're talking about this now in these international dialogues, as a matter of fact, about confidence building measures. What if two countries are out there opposing each other with autonomous systems? On one hand, you could say, well, it's easy for one country to shoot down an autonomous system. There's nobody on board that, no big loss. I don't think the United States should accept that because that's a very dangerous and risky slope to go down. So go ahead, shoot our autonomous systems down. So part of me says we still treat this as we would as a system with people on board. Whether or not that always happens, different one. But we do have to think a little bit more about these rules of engagement, what we would call rules of law. We had laws of the sea for a very long time designed to go after ship-to-ship encounters. Now we're trying to figure out what does that look like with autonomous ships, autonomous drones on land and air, of course, which have been around for a long time. Really good question. It's not fully solved yet. We have to work our way through it.
Yeah, I would just say that one of the concerns that we have around the uses of these technologies is the potential for a swifter escalation because responses are automated. So it might be possible for a series of events to occur before someone gets to get hands back on a keyboard somewhere. And then the other thing is that obviously the cleaner and better thing is for that to be happening in a cleaner environment. So we've talked about how we know that AI and autonomous weapon systems don't necessarily behave in that predictable of a way in like a contested, complex urban environment with lots of civilians around. And so a better environment to think about using them is in the air or in the sea, although they still don't do great recognizing different types of marine vessels, it seems like. But you still would see, I've lost my thread now. No, it's gone. If it comes back, I'll tell you.
Okay, fair enough. Right down front here.
I'm Khalil Bird, KB. I'm a life member of the council. So this is directed to you, General. When you started the Joint Task Force at the Department of Defense on Intelligence, most of the lawmakers that you briefed had no idea what you were working on, and still don't. And we saw this most acutely when people like Mark Zuckerberg would go up and present, and lawmakers were asking questions that were miles away from where the technology actually was, causing frustration on both sides. Do you envision these tools being deployed before civilian lawmakers really have an understanding and grasp of them, of what's happening under the hood?
Possible, but actually hope not. You're going to get my circle needs to be a Venn diagram conversation, which is we have policy circle and we have tech circles, and those worlds understand their worlds very well. It needs to be a Venn diagram. I saw this from the very beginning. Now, there are members, a few members, that have a pretty damn good understanding of these technologies. Aren't many of them, but some. But their staffers are getting better and better. They're bringing in young staffers that do know these technologies, may have even spent some time in one of the big technology or smaller startups that come in to help educate the staffers and members. This is really important. And it's not just on the Hill, by the way. It's in the Department of Defense. It's in the State Department. It's everywhere we're going to see AI applied. People need to have a much better understanding of not only what the technology can do, but what it can't do, the limitations and risks associated with it. There is a danger of just saying, go ahead and deploy this magic stuff and we'll worry about it later. I don't want that to happen. We're in a lot of conversations in my 5 years total up on the Hill, and we came a long way with a better understanding. Oh, that's what you're trying to do. And by the way, at least at the time, it was the single most bipartisan issue I have ever dealt with in my career. Everybody wanted to help. I'm not sure it's quite that way right now.
You see it in the big, beautiful bill, too, in the defense reconciliation portion there in the defense investments. There were, bipartisan agreement on $350 million for AI and testing and evaluation, and another, $200 million for sandboxes to ensure AI systems work. Congress is, at least on the defense side of AI, Congress is coming up to speed, especially at the staffer level.
I think this may be our last question.
Andrew Nagorski. Hi, John.
I haven't seen you in 20 years.
Yes.
Nice to see you.
Question related to the humanitarian aspect of this. I detected, and forgive me if I'm wrong, on both sides here a little bit, the notion that somehow AI can help identify what should be off bounds in warfare. Look at Gaza. How does any human or any AI system do that? With school, hospital, and so forth, when you have a determined opponent who uses those as human shields. Does technology help in any way in that situation?
Do you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go. I mean, this is sort of a number of years ago, I did a piece of journalism on a company called Shield AI, which is in the defense space right now. And I'm not a technologist, but I wrote it for Wired magazine, and they asked me to come because I had fought in an urban battle in Fallujah, much like Gaza. And this company was led by two brothers, one a technologist, one a former Navy SEAL, and their sort of flagship product was a quadcopter that could lift off of a soldier's palm, fly into a building using AI, and map the building to find any threats in that building. And I was sort of surprised during this demonstration. I had like a very visceral and emotional reaction to seeing this quadcopter. And my visceral reaction was I could immediately imagine friends of mine who would be alive if we had had that quadcopter. So that isn't an overarching answer to your question, but that's a very specific example of how AI could have saved, in this case, a Marine's life. And I think this technology, as much as we are talking about its lethality, I think it's very important that we underscore the myriad ways that innovations and particular applications could be used to save lives. Now, as is often the case tragically, probably those applications will be balanced alongside the ways that it can also be used to increase lethality on the battlefield. But that is, I think, a story that is as old as war.
Other side want to respond?
I would only say that we just don't conflate the technical capabilities with policy decisions. And in the Gaza, there are policy decisions that people do not agree with, but they're policy decisions about accepting certain rates of collateral damage and civilian casualties that others would probably not make if they were in a different situation. So technically, AI is being applied in certain, whether or not it is to the extent that's portrayed in the literature, I don't know because I'm not there, but I think these are very deliberate policy choices which have to be assessed in their own right.
If you'll indulge me, during my journalism career, one of the stories I covered on a long-term basis was the change of events in Eastern Europe in the late 1980s into the 1990s. And Andrew Nagorski was in Poland as one of the great explainers of what was happening in Poland, and I haven't seen you since then. You had me in your home many times to explain to me in English what was going on, and it's wonderful to see you again, and thank you for asking a question. I have one question that I fear kind of gets a little bit into everybody's dismissed the notion of the Terminator Wars, et cetera, but is there a scenario in which, you know, in the same way that Iron Dome is missiles shooting down missiles, that it would be our AI drones against their AI drones, and what would be the impact on the humans on the battlefield if that's happening?
I mean, it's certainly plausible in a world where a country like the United States has drone swarms. There's no reason to expect that U.S. adversaries won't. And in fact, we know, frankly, that they are. Some of the best precise mass systems in the world essentially are used by Russia against Ukraine, are built by Iran and supplied to Russia in multiple countries. That's certainly that's a thing that will happen. The question is just whose systems are better programmed. But that's no different than, say, the competition in air combat right now, where you might have you have an aircraft, your opponent has an aircraft, and the question is whose sensors are better and whose missiles are better and can fly further, who can outstick their opponent. This is just another evolution on the battlefield. So I don't think we should be surprised to see it.
Last word from this side.
Yeah, I would just add that, yes, I can certainly imagine a world where it's their robots against our robots, but at the end of the day, if our robots kill their robots or vice versa, then the robots come for the people. I mean, there's always a person behind the robot, and that's how it ends.
Well, and if I can get in here real quick, I would say it doesn't do away with some of the risks of collateral damage or environmental risks, and I think the risks of escalation that I outlined earlier as well.
Thank you very much. All right, that is a wrap on this question and answer portion of the debate. We ran long because the questions were so good. Thank you, everybody, for everything that you brought in. Now we move on to our closing round, and in our closing rounds, our debaters get up once more to the floor and one more time make their case for why they're taking the position human kill switch or confidence in the AI. And we're going to start with Laura Walker McDonald. Again, she is arguing for keeping a human in the loop. Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody for it's an honor to be up here with you guys having this debate. And thanks for such wonderful questions. The ICRC is 160 plus years old. So we did actually get to see the combustion engine arms race. And we came I'm sorry, I just love it so much. The Franco-Prussian War was our entree. So that looked quite different than where we are today. the law does need to move on and to develop, and that's why we're proposing some new rules, some of which I've outlined, but most particularly when autonomous weapon systems are too unpredictable for you to know their effects, and when they are used specifically to target humans, we don't think that's a good idea. We also recommend that there should be some other constraints on other uses of autonomous weapon systems to mitigate some of the challenges to the law that the good news is states have all got together to agree on, this kind of autonomy sort of brings into being. So limiting the types of missions, so against military objectives only, or limiting the scope of some of these missions. When we're starting to see some of these technologies come in on the field, we get to some really strange situations. Like, how do you surrender to a drone? Like, what do you do? Like, you follow it back? Like, how does that work? But these are real things that are starting to occur, and we have to grapple with that. That was the human interaction piece that I forgot about. The question that we had, this is how it should be. This question about how do we actually use AI to reduce harm to civilians? That is a great problem statement. As a technologist, that makes me very happy. Let's start there, and let's look at what the technology is, and there is some very interesting, exciting stuff we could do, looking at things like model cards, to see if we can help teach AI to better look after protected people like civilians, humanitarians, and medical facilities on the battlefield. And that's where I'd like to go next. Get in touch if you want to talk about that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Michael Horowitz, I'm sorry for mangling your name before, but I'm getting it right this time. Michael Horowitz, you are taking the position that AI can be counted on to do the job. This is your last chance to convince us why.
Sure, and thanks so much for having me. This has been a really great conversation, and I think you've heard a lot more agreement in some cases than disagreement. But fundamentally, what do we want at the end of the day? What we want is militaries and weapon systems that can deter conflict, can win if deterrence fails, and can do so in a way that complies with international humanitarian law. And today and moving forward, it will increasingly be AI-enabled systems and autonomous weapon systems that will be better at doing that. Through the testing and evaluation that militaries like the United States have pioneered, there's a real chance to use these kinds of capabilities, not to identify a person on the battlefield. Nobody's going to be surrendering to a drone anytime, a fully autonomous drone anytime soon. But for naval combat, air combat, relatively uncluttered battle spaces, these are technologies that can work now. And if the United States doesn't move ahead in developing them, we know that the United States will fall behind, since other countries are not going slowly. Whether we talk about North Korea, Iran, China, or Russia. This is the military competition of our age. And since, as somebody said, it is the winners that do write the history books at the end of the day, rather be on the winning side. But we can do that without kill switches in a way that promotes strong norms. That, for example, is why when I was in the Defense Department, we created something called the Political Declaration on Responsible Military Use of AI and Autonomy, an international agreement endorsed by 60 countries that promotes strong norms of responsible behavior to ensure that AI doesn't get out of control. But that's different than insisting on a kill switch, because that just won't work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Elliot, you are up. Once again, you are advocating to keep humans in the loop during warfare. Please tell us why.
Sure. So to go way back in time here, Napoleon, a relatively successful military commander, famously said that in war, the moral is to the physical as 3 is to 1. So even Napoleon understood how critically important it was for any army on the battlefield to hold the moral high ground, to believe in the cause that they were fighting, to not just be inspired solely by a sense that might makes right. Now, we've talked a lot about AI very broadly. We're speaking specifically about AI, where there is no real kill switch between the human and the technology. And what we are advocating is that as fast as we implement these technologies and develop these technologies, we need to be equally aggressive in developing the types of international law that allows the United States to continue to have the moral high ground on any future battlefield. And if we look at the history of the United States in war, I think the one thing that we'll find is that the wars that we have won are the ones in which we have been successful morally. Wars like the Second World War, or going even further back to the Civil War. And now when we talk about international law, right, some of the big ones we're talking about is the Geneva Convention, the Hague Convention at the outside of the 20th century, which is sort of one of the great conventions where we developed a lot of this international law, particularly as it pertains to war. But if any of you want to go deep on the Hague Convention, what you'll find is that the bit of law in the Hague Convention that dealt specifically with the laws of war was the Lieber Code. And the Lieber Code was developed in the United States during the Civil War. Again, a war in which we were able to capture the moral imperative. So as critically as important as it is to develop the technology, to keep up with our peers, we as the United States also need to lead the way morally by developing international laws that can keep up with new artificial intelligence systems if we want to win the next war, because we have never won a war where we didn't possess the moral high ground.
Dr. Shanahan, you get the last word here. One more time, please tell us why you believe AI can get the job done.
War is a tragic yet perpetual condition of human existence. Horrible mistakes and even willful negligence will never disappear. AI will not eliminate the fog, friction, and chaos of combat. And AI by itself will not make any future war more or less likely. Yet AI's potential benefits are so significant that we could expect militaries across the globe to adopt them into their militaries fairly rapidly. And the more that happens, the more we have to be worried about what happens next. I am not an AI doomer or a boomer, an accelerationist or an effective altruist, a utopian or a dystopian. I am a practitioner, a pragmatic optimist. I believe that AI can be a useful, even critical tool to augment human decision-making in ways that prove enormously beneficial under the stress of combat. I also think we can use AI in safe, lawful, and ethical ways. Rather than chasing this elusive kill switch, we should be focusing instead on applying human judgment throughout the entire AI lifecycle to be designing and fielding AI-enabled military systems that allow us to take the most out of these technologies without becoming subservient to them. The future is not about humans or smart machines, each viewed in isolation. It's about optimizing human-machine integration in ways that are people-centric and tech-enabled. And finally, I have a lot more confidence in AI as a technology than I do in the human policymakers to trust them that they're always going to make the right choices in crises and conflict. So while I am not an advocate for the human kill switch, I suggest we need something roughly analogous to prevent future human decision makers from making really bad choices about the use of force in the future before it's too late. Now that may be our greatest future challenge. Thank you.
Can you stay up here? Can I ask the four of you to join me up here? So that is a wrap on this debate. I want to thank the Council on Foreign Relations. I want to thank our four debaters for doing what I said at the beginning we set out to do, which is to show that there can be disagreement with respect, mutual respect, and also we show there can be argumentation with nuance. And I think we really proved that today because of the way all four of you argued. So thank you very, very much for that. And I also want to thank everybody who got up and asked a question. I think this is the first time I have ever not had to turn down a question because they all got us to really interesting places. So we very much appreciate that, and it's going to make for a great program for us. That's it for us. If you could all shake hands with one another, we're going to say goodnight.
Thank you.